In the Australian studies we've done, 65% of us from ages 18 to 65 plus still report this need to conform to being this good girl who tries to perform perfectly, to please others, to protect everybody. What we also saw in the research was just the incredible cost that this is having for women, from exhaustion and resentment and feeling a sense of loss of who am I, because I've twisted myself into who everybody else expects me to be. If you resonate with any of those ideas, then this research and these practices could be useful for you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and this is Well, Hello Anxiety. In a world that often moves too fast, we're here to pause, breathe, and understand anxiety together. Each episode will explore practical strategies, share honest conversations, and uncover the science behind anxiety and well-being, all while creating a space where it's okay to not be okay. Let's continue this journey together. Dr. Michelle McQuaid, a very warm welcome to you joining me here on Well, Hello Anxiety podcast today.
It's such a pleasure and privilege to be with you all, Jodi.
Oh, thank you. It's so lovely. We've been chatting off air, haven't we? I could have recorded from the beginning because we've got so much in common, and I'm really actually very moved by the fact that on your About page, because you've got a really rich history as a professional, and I want to come to that in a moment, but you bravely, and I say bravely, assuming it took some courage to do so, to share your unofficial story along with your official story about your professional career and the journey that life has taken you on. And it's quite an incredible professional journey that you have shaped. And I'll share a few of the highlights from your bio. You're an award-winning researcher. You're an honorary fellow at Melbourne University's Centre for Wellbeing Science, author of 6, no less, best-selling books, numerous contributions to the scientific literature. You are a podcast host, and your work has featured in media outlets here in Australia and around the world. But I would love for you to share with us, please, what's the unofficial story of Michelle?
I think the unofficial story is the far more interesting one than the professional story myself, Jodi, but I do have a bias in this. And I think partly because I got to live it, but also I think it's so helpful to understand each other's lived experiences. Spent a lot of my life, I'm a reforming good girl is the way I talk about myself. And I spent a lot of my life trying to smooth out all my rough edges so I would be shiny and beautiful. And I was at a conference once with a wonderful American speaker called Nadia Boltz-Weber, and she was really challenging us about trying to be the best versions of ourselves, because if we do that, if we're all polished and shiny, there are no rough edges for anybody else to hang on to for us. And so that definitely gave me more of the courage to go, well, yeah, the lived experience, all the bumps and the lumps and the falls and the heartache and the celebrations and the triumphs in the journey are probably far more important than the professional polish, particularly when we're talking about things like navigating anxiety and caring for our well-being, and knowing that we're not always just improving well-being and it's always going up, but what is normal and healthy for all of us is that it's ebbing and flowing. So I had a pretty rough start into this world. I was born to 2 very young parents, an unplanned pregnancy that resulted in a forced marriage, which early 1970s, that was how things were done. Yeah. My dad, bless him, was just back from the Vietnam War, suffering very acute PTSD, which of course we didn't understand in those days, self-medicating with alcohol and drugs. And so we lived in a house where there was a lot of violence and turmoil and chaos the first 4.5 years of my life. And then my mother, bless her, got the first no-fault divorce in Victoria, which meant that she could go to court and separate without having to document all of the things that were happening in our home, which she just didn't feel able to do. She was allowed to just say, I want to go, and the court would grant the divorce. So I grew up with a single mum for a long time. She was a school teacher. Money was tight. We were all healing from trauma, but we didn't talk about trauma in those days. So when we moved out, it was like, well, none of that stuff happened. Just pretend it wasn't there. We were having intermittent custody visits for a little while with my dad. During those custody visits, I did experience sexual abuse, as did my sister, but we didn't know all of this for decades later because, again, nobody talked about these things. And so I grew up, I came into life as a teenager, pretty raw and hurt and anxious and hyper vigilant and trying to control my world in ways that just felt uncontrollable. school. And when I was 16, as you can only do at 16, I made the very wise decision to say I didn't trust any of the adults around me anymore to make decisions for my life, so I'd be better off alone. And so I left home when I was 16. I had a job at Kmart. That was how I paid my bills while I still tried to finish school. So it was a pretty wild ride into the early stages of life. I have a family that has a lot of mental health challenges along that way. We've had suicide and bipolar disorder. My boys were later diagnosed. I have two boys diagnosed with autism. Part of that, as many women do, I realized, I think I'm a little out there on the spectrum myself. But look, we're here to tell the story, definitely still on that path of healing. But I think that's what drew me to the science of wellbeing so much. I was like, somebody somewhere must have answers and tools to some of this. And so the last 20 years of my life have been very much buried in the science, but looking for practical little things we can all do every day to navigate our anxiety, whether that's anxiety from a capital T trauma or a smaller case T trauma, and just navigating the world around us.
You are really such a trailblazer in the world of positive psychology and wellbeing science. You have always shared practical tools and that people can, put into practice and build their toolkit. And you've done so much work, and you started off in a corporate role, and of course have done further study and really just kind of followed your heart in what was important to you. And it's led you to a place where the last 12 months of your work have taken a different direction, haven't they? Can you tell us about the good girl dilemma and really what a large part of your work is now in this area of trying to really change the way that women are showing up for themselves?
About 2 years ago, I went on retreat with a group of friends to Nepal. It was a yoga hiking sort of retreat, and we were sitting on a mountain. It's the complete cliche, Jodi. Sitting on the mountain, I'm like, mountain, what am I meant to do next?
Give me an epiphany.
Exactly. I was like, please, right now, on time and schedule, please, can you make it tidy and easy to understand? I was at a place in my life where professionally I felt like I had achieved so many of the things that I'd set out to do that had been unimaginable at the time. And I had loved all of that journey, working with workplaces around how do we care for well-being, working with leaders on how do we help people feel safe enough rather than creating unnecessary anxiety at work, figuring out how do we co-create change. And I had loved all of the research, loved all the practice, loved all the teaching and coaching that I'd done. And I'd come to a place in it where I was like, what's next? And that was a blank page. I really didn't know. And so I'm sitting on the mountain in Nepal. I'm like, mountain, please, what's next? And what I got was success would equal joyfully following what called to my heart. And that was so beautiful because that was not how I'd thought about success. Success was about the numbers and the accolades and the recognition and how much you'd published this year and who you were next having on the podcast. And so the idea that success would just be joyfully following what called to my heart was the epiphany, amazingly, as cliche as it was. Yeah. Because then I was like, well, mountain, that sounds great. What should I do? And the mountain was very silent after that.
It's like you've got what you came for.
Yeah, exactly. Came down the mountain really sitting with that question. What joyfully calls to my heart? And it actually took a while after that. And then I was with a girlfriend and I was remembering this storybook that I had when I was about 4 years old. Again, my mother didn't have a lot of money. If we got to the end of the weekly supermarket shop and there was a few cents left, then the very big treat was you could get to buy a little golden book. They were 39 cents at the end of the checkout. And on one of these special occasions, I chose this book and I couldn't read at the time. I didn't know what the cover said, but in the middle of the cover, there was this hand-drawn illustration of a little girl looking very calm and serene out at me. And around the edges of the cover, the same little girl was in these smaller poses where she was pulling her sister's hair, breaking her mother's vase, like hiding her head in shame in her hands. And I think it was those pictures. I understood exactly what those little pictures meant. And so I grabbed it. I gave it to my mother, who at that stage, liked to think of herself as a feminist. And I said, I want this book. And I remember her saying, you sure? And I'm like, yes, it's this book. Anyway, the book was called Good Little, Bad Little Girl. And I made my mother read this over and over again. I think, Jodi, it was my first self-help book. And the book was full of all the ways she was a good girl. She was quiet. She was tidy. She never interrupted anybody. She didn't eat too much. And then all the ways that she was bad, which of course were the opposite to many of those things. And the kicker was at the end, there was this big surprise that the good little girl and the bad little girl were the same little girl.
Right.
But what she found was if she made the good little girl grow taller and taller and the bad little girl smaller and smaller, then she would be happy and loved.
Wow.
And so I think, this was, late 1970s. While we still see similar themes today, they might be a little more subtle in them. What we find in our research, because I was like, well, is this just me? Was it just me that this influenced? So I came down from the mountain. I was like, there's something in this. I'd like to rewrite this book, but was this just a Michelle thing? And so being the researcher, we went out and we did research groups with women all over the world. And what we found was that for so many of us, in fact, in the Australian studies we've done, 65% of us from ages 18 to 65 plus still report this need to conform to being this good girl who tries to perform perfectly, to please others, to protect everybody. And so out of that, I was like, right, where are the tools? What do you do? How do you break free of this? Because what we also saw in the research was just the incredible cost that this is having for women, from exhaustion and resentment and feeling a sense of loss of who am I, because I've twisted myself into who everybody else expects me to be, right through to at the extreme, addiction, self-harm, suicidal ideation, staying trapped in domestic violence, poverty and the like. I will just add a caveat to this, that I'm using the word girl and woman here in an overly simplified way. And so we're always cautious with our work to say these words don't do justice to the fabulous complexity of who we each are. And so as we're doing this research and looking at tools, number one, we're always acknowledging that if you resonate with any of those ideas, then this research and these practices could be useful for you. And secondly, that while women and girls grow up with a certain set of societal expectation, boys and men do too. And so while women have often been conditioned to be good girls, guys get conditioned to be tough guys. And so the expectations for men and women here might start in different places, but what we're finding over and over through our research and other people is that really what we want is just the permission to be human in all our beautiful imperfection, and to know that we will be loved for that. And so how do we thrive and support each other through that, rather than adding more anxiety onto the pile of what it is to navigate life?
Well, the mountain served you well, and it was a retreat that
worth the climb.
Yeah, absolutely worth the climb. And it's that time and that space, isn't it? And that this has come to you, and that it's resonated so greatly with the women that you have spoken to. It gets me thinking, because I relate to that too, of course, and I've taken the survey that's on your website, and I completed your research questionnaire as well. I just got thinking, gosh, to have this kind of top of mind and an opportunity to kind of reflect on what we do and how this kind of good girl persona kind of shows up. I wonder if you could share some examples from the research, or just kind of give us a bit of an idea about how these beliefs are kind of showing up in everyday life for women, because I'm already relating to some of the things that you have been talking about, and I know a lot of listeners will be too, but I'm sure there's more to it. So yeah, what are some of those examples?
Yeah, there's really three ways we found in the research that these good girl expectations show up practically in our lives. The first is that need to perform perfectly. Right. So, we want to look the right way, sound the right way, feel the right way, do things the right way, whether that's our parenting, whether it's the way we keep our homes, whether it's the way we do our jobs. Like, it really just ripples into every part of our life. And what the women in the studies told us is that for 77% of them, they spend a lot of time trying to be flawless in every domain of their life, and often to avoid criticism. And I think many of us will relate to that fear of when we're not doing it perfectly, because none of us are. None of us ever are doing it perfectly. It's the spoiler alert here. But when we're not, often our coping mechanism for that is to respond with a lot of judgment and self-criticism, thinking that we're kind of metaphorically kicking ourselves up the butt to do better, try harder, perform more perfectly. So this performing perfectly takes a huge toll. And what we saw in the research research was that 82% of the Australian women we surveyed were reporting that they were exhausted from trying to perform perfectly when none of us are. The second way it shows up is in pleasing everyone, right? We feel like we've got to keep everybody happy all of the time. And what we saw was that 78% of the Australian women we surveyed said, you know what? Yep, I prioritize in pleasing others in the hope that I will avoid rejection.
Right.
And what's really interesting is on the other side of that, though, what happens is that we end up over time feeling more and more resentful of all those people that we're saying yes to and feeling unable to unapologetically set some self-care boundaries where we need them because we're worried that people are going to say we're selfish and that we're not doing enough for everybody else. And then the third and final way it shows up for us is in the need to feel like we have to silence ourselves in order to protect other people so that we won't be abandoned. And so 61% of the women said, you know, I am often silencing how I feel. I don't want to rock the boat, don't want to be seen as difficult or demanding. I think, you know, in the stories of Me Too, we saw just how prevalent and widespread and the toll and cost of what that silencing can be. And so, you know, here again, really trying to help women understand that that silencing comes at such a huge price. We talk about this as kind of a junk food love, Jodi, that like in the moment, I feel I'm doing these things to earn your love, but it only kind of lasts like a sugar high for about 30 minutes. And then I've got to do the next thing to earn your love. And then I've got to do the next thing. So rather than actually earning true belonging, feeling like I'm loved for who I am, I'm fitting in. I'm accepting that fitting in will have to be enough for me. And that means I've got to constantly hustle for my self-worth with you.
You know, when you say it like that, the next step for women who feel this way, the next step for them to take feels obvious, but it's not simple, is it?
No, not at all.
Why is it so hard for, and it's interesting because I'm like you, I'm in my 50s, I turn 50 and I've just got this different way of looking at things. And I was having a chat with a friend who's also hit her 50s last year, and I said, I just am caring less. I didn't quite put it like that. I didn't quite put it as politely.
Put it like that, Jodi. That's exactly what it is, and it's healthy and good for you.
It is, and I know that when I share my vulnerabilities and those rough edges about my journey with depression and anxiety and my mental health, my ups and downs, that it humanizes me, and people really respond to that in a way that really encourages me to want to share more, because it's not the polished, you know, like we can all look at other women, we can all look at other people, and it's very easy with social media to say, well, they have everything going for them. But what we know, we learn as we get older is everybody's got a story. Everybody's got an unofficial story. And you've shared yours here today. Thank you. And you share more in your podcast, Good Girl Game Changers podcast. This idea of, you know, having the tidy home. I mean, my home is very lived in. People very nicely say, you've got such a warm, welcoming, lived in home. And that's because when my mental health is excellent, I couldn't care less about the state of my home. I mean, it's not a tip, of course, but when my mental health I'm really struggling, it's like I have to be on top of everything, and the flaws bother me and things bother me a lot more. But, you know, it's very easy for us to look around and think other people have got it together. But it sounds like the majority of women, we're all kind of playing at this same good girl game. And so why is it so hard? I guess acknowledgement and awareness is one. We're starting here today. Why is it so hard for us to be able to speak up for ourselves, ask for what we want, and kind of protect ourselves over and above protecting other people when it matters?
The question I started asking when I was looking at the research, and even at myself, I'm like, I am a smart, capable, kick-ass woman. What the heck am I doing? You know, running around trying to be this good girl, you know, this late in life. Surely by now I have figured it out. And so I think the first thing to just acknowledge is that we, from a very early age, and it still continues today, are groomed through these societal expectations to be good girls, right? We get groomed often through our families. Like, it's the way to get us to sit down and obey and do the things our families need us to do. Be a good girl and help out with this. When we do something right, it's the easiest thing in the world for those of us who are parents, we all know, to say, oh, good girl or good boy or things like that to each other, to our kids, rather than giving them effort-based praise of, hey, I can see you really thought about that, or I could see the effort you put into that. So we all do some of this grooming. And most of us, again, not from an ill-intentioned place, but from trying to either protect our kids, in that we know that if they are good girls or they're tough guys, the world might be a little gentler on them. But also because it's so baked into us, we often don't see it. Think about schools. I don't know about you, Jodi, but I was always either getting gold stars for having done the right thing on the chart, or I was being sent outside the room when I was disruptive and standing in the corridor a bit. Think about if you're part of a spiritual or faith group, there's a lot of reinforcement there around the grooming, through to our media and the like. Again, it's not that long ago that we finally got Frozen and a female heroine in a Disney, movie, Moana and people like that, to be able to have any idea that women could be in these different roles. So we're still very much in a society that grooms us, often unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, to benefit from it, for us to be in these behaviours. So it can be really hard to break free of, can be really hard to even see it, number one. So I think we have to come to this with lots of self-compassion, to go, I am living in a system, in a world right now, in a time where the other people benefit from me complying to these behaviours.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of skin in the game to kind of keep us there.
Yes.
And then secondly, there's the part of us. And I think this is really interesting in terms of what happens in our brains that makes it hard to break free when we can see it. And so a big part of this is that we are wired for social connections. Our brain feels social pain in the same way that we feel physical pain. Like, it lights up the same centers when we're scanning people's brains. And so that feeling of social disconnected, of not being liked, of not being approved of not fitting in, it is physically painful for us. And so the thing is that when we start to say, well, no, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to have a messy house when you come over, Jodi. And no, I'm going to set that boundary. Even though you're asking me to help you, I'm going to say no, it'll be a whole sentence. And I'm going to go and have a walk on the beach instead.
Yes.
Or I'm going to speak up and say that didn't feel good for me. So, I would rather we don't have conversations like this next time. This is how it would work better for me.
Yeah.
So taking those risks of not conforming often sparks our anxiety, our alert responses in our brain for hypervigilance, to say, people are not going to like this potentially, and it will sting. It will hurt physically, no different than if I went out, tripped over and fell down on the steps, right? Yeah. So our brain does this faulty maths when it comes to making choices, where we tend to overweight the short-term consequences and underweight the long-term costs. And what we saw over and over again in our research with women, for those who do break free of these expectations, they would say, you know what? Yeah, sometimes in the short term, people were not happy with me. People did say I was selfish or difficult or demanding, and that didn't always feel great. But if I could just breathe past that moment, if I could just hold my ground, long term, what I gained is I have better ongoing levels of well-being and mental health. I have a better sense of who I am and aligned in my integrity, and I have better relationships where I'm not feeling resentful towards other people because I feel like I'm being taken advantage of or having to squeeze myself into shapes that is not who I want to be. So there's a long-term payoff, but there absolutely can be short-term costs. Our brains don't like that, and so we kind of have to help support ourselves, scaffold ourselves through sometimes that initial pain. And again, sometimes that can be an ongoing thing. And for me and my mother, who I love dearly, and, she's had a challenging life and difficult relationships at times to navigate, that's definitely been a journey. And we've had times where we've had to have years apart and a bit more silence with each other in order to be able to come back and heal where we are. And so again, sometimes that rejection, that hurt when we don't conform, can have real long-term costs in our relationships.
Yes, it can. And sometimes those relationships are better let go of, but that can be very, very painful. And it's it's so interesting because you've got me reflecting as I've been preparing for our conversation today and learning more about your work and also thinking about conversations that I have with the women in my life and just how much I'm seeing this play out. And I wonder if you could give us an example of a way we might be able to articulate that we want to put our needs ahead of a request or a demand or a deadline that's too tight? Or is there sort of an example that you could give us, like a little mini script? And this is on the spot, of course, but, maybe that comes from the research, maybe that comes from some of the coaching that you do. I wonder if that's something that you could share with us.
Yeah, I love Dr. Julianne Shaw, who is a therapist in the US, has a beautiful book called Boundaries That Stick. I highly recommend it if this is an area that you're like, yes, that resonates, and I think it does for many of us. And Julianne has a really simple little script that I find so helpful, and it's around when something is upsetting me, right? It's an unreasonable request or somebody's behaving in a way that just doesn't feel right for me. Just taking that moment, even if it's a little on the fly as you get practiced in this skill of going, well, what is not okay about this? Like, why is this not sitting right with me? What boundary is it breaking for me? And then the alternative, which I think is such an important step, is what would be the okay thing for this to work? This person's trying to get something that they need from me, or they're wanting support from me in a way. What would be okay? So this is what the not okay version looks like. That's what's happening right now. What would be the okay? And then if you can, and you really want to set a boundary around it, what will you do next time the not okay thing happens? And the trick with this is to not be too black and white. It's not like, that's it, I'm never going to speak to you again. Or that's it, I'm quitting. Or, we're not friends anymore. But to try and find the grey in there and something that is in your control rather than something that you're expecting them to do. So let's try and figure out an example of that. Over the past few years, gone through a very amicable divorce with my husband of a very long time, 20 plus years. And we've been navigating what co-parenting looks like in different houses and things like that. And we had a situation a couple of months ago where he had had a conversation with my sons in a way that I wasn't there. I wasn't part of it. We had spoken about it before, but he did it in a way that was not what we agreed at all.
Yes.
And it created some really hurt feelings and chaos in all of that. And so I needed to be clear with him, having those kind of conversations without me there, or having those conversations not in the way we agreed, was not okay. I was not happy about it. I didn't feel like that was the role modeling or situation we wanted for our kids. What would be okay about it would be to, again, have more conversation before, or if he's not sure how to navigate a difficult conversation like that, have me there for it with the kids, or at least let me know he's had it and it went off the rails. Don't let the kids come and tell me that he's had it and then I'm dealing with the fallout kind of from a blind spot.
Yes.
And then what would we do if that thing happened again in future? If you had more conversations like these, for me, was we are going to keep having these uncomfortable conversations about what I need until we get it right, which is his worst nightmare, right? It's like, more of this, are you kidding? But I was and it might sound soft, but more than anything, I was like, I'm not going to be silent about this. I'm not just going to bite my tongue. I'm not just going to keep letting you do it. I'm not going to do the emotional lifting of patching things up after you've kind of blown it up with the kids. We are going to figure this out, and I'm invested enough in this relationship and our family, even though we're divorced, to make sure you build the skills you need to get this right.
Yes.
So that was probably worse than me going, I'm never going to speak to you again in his mind.
But I think he's going to think twice next time.
Exactly. So I find this helpful just to think about. My little script is, number one, what's the hurt? What's happening here that I'm feeling hurt or upset or distressed or anxious about? Just so I know that. We need to be clear on that from the start. And then the second in my script is, what's the hope? How would I like this to have been done instead? And then the third step, if I need that, is, and what am I going to do? What am I putting in place around my behavior, my beliefs, my feelings to respond to this in future? And sometimes I'll tell the person that third part. Other times it's more for me to be clear, you know what? if this continues, this is how I'm going to honour and advocate and show up for myself, and not just let somebody keep walking over and over the top of me in this situation. Now, because this can vary, right? You were talking about, well, what if it's a boss that keeps coming and giving us a deadline at the last minute? I, again, in the past have definitely done this, but I appreciate it's not always available to us depending on our circumstances, to say, hey, it's absolutely always okay to ask me to jump in and give you a hand where you most need it at work. It's not okay to give this to me 5 minutes before I'm due to walk out the door and pick up my kids, because I can't actually, I either now am not there for my kids and I've got to rejuggle a ton of stuff, or I have to say no to you. And that's, I don't want to be saying no to you. I want to be saying, yes, how can I help as much as I can? And then if it happens again, I'm going to just have to say no, because my kids are my first priority. I'm super happy to talk about other ways we can organise workload or things like that, but I can't just keep dumping everything at the last minute because something suddenly came up. So how do we figure that out? What I love about Jules's work on boundaries is she talks about boundaries are there to connect us, not protect us from each other. And I think many of us think about a boundary as a protection thing. I've got to put my boundary in place so that you don't keep taking advantage of me or hurting me in some way. But Jules talks about, if you care enough to set a boundary with someone, then that relationship means something to you. You're actually trying to find a way to make it work, not to break the relationship, because otherwise you just break it and be done.
Yes.
And so then if we think about a boundary as a bridge of connection, I'm setting it, trying to communicate to this person, you matter to me. This relationship matters to me. I'm trying to find ways to make it work for both of us. It's not currently doing that right now. And rather than biting my tongue and just putting up with that, I care enough about it to talk with you so we can hopefully figure something out.
And arrive at a mutually beneficial decision. So it ultimately is a win-win. And don't we appreciate it when we are treated that way? I think about it from the other point of view. Sometimes without realizing it, we might put someone under pressure and not realize what they've got going on and not understand kind of the timeline that they're working on. And yet if they were to come back to us with a considered kind of approach to say, hey, I really want to be able to kind of do this, but it's not going to work this way. How can we make it work another way, or on another day or at a different time? Then we don't feel kind of like we're getting a telling off. We don't feel like we're being rejected. If you're in a position of authority, so to speak, if you're the boss and you've got a staff member who is kind of having this conversation with you, it kind of preserves your ego a little bit. It's just about how can we work together. And I really do appreciate the examples that you've given and the script, and it's practice, isn't it? You've really,
I think it gets intertwined for women between that silencing ourselves and wanting to please everybody else and trying to do it perfectly. And so we kind of get squeezed in the middle of it, and we just put up with it until we're exhausted and resentful and feeling like we're breaking down, which you were talking earlier about the age and stage kind of this. We definitely see still for young women today in our studies, 18 to 24 is where these things are most pronounced. But the age group kind of 24 to 35, often when we're starting families and climbing career ladders and figuring ourselves out, is where it gets most pronounced for the exhaustion and the kickback. But then once we start getting to 45, 55, 65, we do stop caring so much, Jodi. I think partly estrogen and perimenopause and menopause. I know for me, I stopped caring a whole lot once that estrogen was left in my system. And research would support it.
Yes.
But actually, the women that are best at this are 65 years plus. And I think in part because by then we've lived enough of life, we've seen enough of relationships, we've given enough to everybody else to know that if we are not also standing in our integrity, honouring who we are, being honest about that with other people, we never really get that chance to belong in our relationships with others. We're always just settling for fitting in. And that's a hard way to live a life long term.
It is. You've taken me back to an episode of Oprah, because you will have grown up. I spent a lot of time watching Oprah, Bold and the Beautiful, I'm embarrassed to say, but I loved it.
Yeah, I hear it.
And I remember when Oprah turned 40, and I don't know how old she is now. I don't know what the age gap is between Oprah and me, but I just remember her saying how much more empowered she felt. And I personally, from my point of view, as you have, and I just want to really acknowledge and thank you for sharing your journey with us obviously we're just taking a snapshot of what your life has been like as growing up. And I really want to acknowledge and thank you for sharing that unofficial story with us. And it's getting older, I always say, is such a gift, and I'm so grateful. There's a lot to look forward to for those of you who aren't there yet.
I would say it only gets better the further you go. What was interesting in the research with the women, Jodi, is there were 3 skills we found that particularly for older women were helping them care less in the best possible way, right?
Yeah.
A lot of this we found that the 2 questions that can make a big difference for women is starting to think about, before I say yes to things or take something on whose terms and for whose benefit am I doing this? And interestingly, the answer to that for most of us is rarely ever always just my terms, my benefit, nobody else. Because we are social creatures, it's looking for the win-win, yeah? Might be some of my terms and some of yours, and it's for some of my benefit and it's for some of yours, because this is how we maintain equal, healthy, mutual relationships. What it can't be is always at my cost, because that's where it becomes unsustainable. And so the women were telling us there were 3 skills they really prioritized building, which the good news is available to us even when we're in our 20s if we wanted to start younger. But the first is the showing self-compassion. So instead of beating ourselves up and kind of ratcheting up our anxiety levels when we're not doing it perfectly, remembering that we are all perfectly imperfect, and the point of this human adventure is to just learn and grow as best we can as we go. The second is secure attachment. And traditionally we've looked at secure attachment. How did you go with your parents? How are you going with your romantic partner? But the newest research in secure attachment is looking at how are you securely attached to yourself? Do you understand how your nervous system moves between protection circuits when you're feeling unsafe and connection circuits when you feel safe? And can you help restore that sense of connection when you're out in your protection circuit and it's not serving you well? And so this is, will I show up for myself? Will I advocate for myself? Will I ask for the help that I need? Or am I busy just believing that everybody will abandon me if I dare to do those things? And then the third skill is self-leadership. And this is the research and tools coming out of internal family systems that have become quite popular the last few years and more mainstream. But it's knowing that we all have this, they call it self with a capital S, this wiser, kinder, compassionate, creative, curious, clear, connected part of ourselves that we can tap into. And how when we're in anxiety, when we're in fear, when we're in overwhelm, do we just slow things down to be able to find that wiser kind of part of ourselves so that then we can operate from that place and go, hey, it's okay. I'm a bit older now. I'm a bit wiser. I've got a bit more resource. Let's kind of grow up together here and get and do this in a different way than what we've done in the past. So I think these 3 skills become hugely accessible and valuable to all of us, regardless of age, if we are wanting to break free of these good girl beliefs.
I was always the good girl. When you said about school, it was like there was no way I was ever kicked out of anything. I was just so good. And it's funny because when I became a teacher, which was how I started my professional career, I realised from a teacher's point of view that you talk to kids about kind of poor decisions that they've made or poor behaviour and things like that, but you might sort of appear to be, a bit miffed about it or something, but it's, you don't really feel angry or upset or anything. And I sort of realised, oh my gosh, like this was all a bluff. I could have done, broken a few rules.
Far more fun, Jodi.
I could have had far more fun. And I was saying, listeners might remember, I was saying how our son is very much more like me and our daughter McKinley is very much more like Pete. And Pete did break a lot of rules. Recently, my daughter, I was so impressed with her. Our dog has had to wear one of those Elizabethan collars. He's been a bucket head. And we bought this it's an inflatable cloud collar and it goes around his neck and it's much more comfortable and he can still get to the wound he's been trying to kind of clean, but not as easily, not as quickly. And it's okay to have that on him. It's a bit more comfy for him when we're around and we can keep an eye on him. And I spoke to her the other day and I wasn't home for hours and she said, as soon as I got home, I got Dusty's cloud collar and I took the other collar off and it was such initiative. Yeah. And I just said, I love that you thought to do that for him. I could have just as easily said, hey, good girl, that's awesome that you did that. It's so easy to roll off the tongue. So a few tips for us as parents, boys or girls, what are a couple of things that we can kind of watch out for with the way that we communicate with them and kind of like reward them for their efforts, choices, behaviours and things?
Yeah, well, a couple of things here we can play with as parents. The first is the researcher Dr. Carol Dweck around growth mindsets. And what she found is that those of us who believe that, I come into the world with a certain amount of intelligence and ability, but with effort and practice, I can always improve, do better in every domain of life over time. And that the way we cultivate those mindsets in kids is to praise them for their effort and what they're putting in, rather than giving them personality praise, like, you're such a good girl, you're so clever, you're so smart, you're so funny, you're so pretty. And those things do roll so easily off the tongue. And in the moment, of course, we see our kids grow 10 foot tall, because who doesn't like to be told those things? But the challenge that her research and others find is that on the other side of that, the question they're left with is, but how do I do that again? Like, I was so funny in that or so pretty in that, but how do I do that again? Because I want more of that praise. So one of the beauties is when we praise their effort, hey, I love the way you told that story. You really brought the characters to life. Or, hey, I love the way you thought about which collar was right for the dog and to make him more comfortable. That was a really thoughtful act. Then not only are our kids still 10 feet tall because they've been recognized and appreciated as we all long to be, but they also know specifically, what was it that I did that you valued? And, I could do more of that. I could do that tomorrow when I come home and think about the dog collar again.
Yes.
So effort-based praise, one of the simplest and most powerful things, not just for kids, but for everybody. And it isn't generally the way that we talk to each other. And then the other one I'm always encouraging is just helping our kids understand that we do live in a world of systems. They're in a schooling system, or my son wasn't well recently, so we were in the healthcare system. Or, so we are surrounded by these systems that are designed to try to look after all of us and help us get through life, but often are a bit of a one size doesn't quite fit anybody kind of system. And they can end up with all sorts of weird rules, like don't leave the school grounds, which some days could have really good reasons to be there and other days not so much.
Yeah.
So I try to really encourage our kids to, one, see the systems that they're a part of, know that they are just a system. It's not an always has to be this way thing, and that they are as much a part of the system as the system is of them. And then to start asking, on whose terms, for whose benefit, am I doing what this system requires of me? It's always on the system's terms, and it's at your cost. That is not a system that is working for you. Yeah. And we need to know then that we can bend systems or walk away entirely from some of those systems. It's not always as easy, but we do see, of course, lots of increases in homeschooling going on around Australia right now. Those are parents and kids going, that education system does not work for me the way it is. On whose terms, for whose benefit, I am going to choose to do it a different way. Yeah. My other advice for my kids is if you can't get out of the system and you can't bend it, try to be in it for as little time as possible and then move on, because there again is just unfortunately so much evidence that sometimes these systems can do so much harm to us when they're not able to be flexible or think about who else's terms and who else's benefits matter here.
Really insightful, and it's something I'm going to talk to the kids about as soon as I see them this afternoon, because even just for me as an adult, I think about all the systems that we're in as a family, and sometimes you're in them and then you're out of them, and sometimes you're in them for a very long time. I chatted with a mum at a singing lesson. My daughter has a singing lesson each week, and her daughter was having her first singing lesson, and her daughter is being schooled at home, and the mum was talking about being a part of the NDIS system and how long everything was taking and how much everything was costing, and just kind of the system. And I know there are people listening who will be nodding their heads going, yes, know it well, and would love to get out of it. But yes, so I think that having that awareness of where I am and on whose terms and for whose benefit, and just sort of stepping back a little bit and looking at what it is that's influencing our lives can be really helpful, and especially for our kids, because they've got more choice and more decision-making power than they might sometimes realise. Yeah. And I like that we can, give them this perspective and help them to see things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think it's really important. My eldest is 20 and his partner was unwell the last week or so, and she's been in hospital and, they were trying to figure out how to bring her home, and the hospital was keen to keep her. And he said, Mum, it's terrible for her mental health. Like she's, I need to get her home. home. She'll get better if she can come home and rest. And so he's 20, she's 19, like they're young, they're doing all the growing up is hard to do stage of adulting. And he said to me, don't worry, Mum. He said, I'm channeling everything you taught me about systems and I'm advocating for her with the doctors. And he got her out on Monday to go home. And I was so grateful and proud in that moment for him to go, thank goodness I taught you, because, they're young kids and they've got old, busy doctors, running around trying to do things. They can't necessarily see, perhaps the impact that it's having for her mental health. And so again, I just think this is really important that we encourage our kids to understand and to use the agency and choice that is available to them where it is in order to look after their mental health and their physical well-being wherever possible.
Absolutely. That must have been a fist pump moment for you.
I was like, oh,
yes.
I don't think he could have given me a bigger compliment.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. And has real life implications for her and for him, of course, as her partner. Agency was the word that I was thinking of when you were sharing that story and thinking that we sometimes feel as though we don't have it, but we actually have so much more agency when we can see a system for what it is, think about for whose benefit and on whose terms, and also be willing to step forward and be more prepared to ask for what we need. I saw a post you put on LinkedIn just yesterday, and you opened the post by saying, this one is making my heart race with equal parts terror and joy. And I'd love you to share with us what you wrote about in that post and what you are super proud to have recently released into the world.
Yeah, well, so I was joyfully following what called to my heart since I came down from the mountain, had those realizations. And that has been sharing this, doing this research and starting to get ready to share it with more women around the world. So Evie, my collaborator you mentioned earlier, and I have written 2 books. One is called The Perfectly Imperfect Little Girl. And I took that golden book, Jodi, and I rewrote it the way I wish I had had it as a child. But I did make it an adult version. It does have some swear words in it. So I love that it's this playful, subversive storybook that we are just fine as women, whether we are good girls or bad girls or perfect or imperfect as we come.
Yes.
But then again, being a researcher that loves the practical, as we've talked about earlier, we wrote a second book called The Perfectly Imperfect Women's Journal. Yeah. And in there, we've put some of the memoir of each of our stories, all the evidence-based tools, the summary of the research that we've done with women. So we are getting ready to launch them. By the time this podcast goes live, they'll be available. People can find them at thegoodgirlgamechangers.com or on Amazon, or hopefully go to your local bookstore, ask them. They'll be able to get it if they don't have it.
Yes.
But it's been definitely the joyfully following what called to my heart. And right at this moment, as you start to take it into the world with conversations like this, that slight bit of terror of there is a level of vulnerability and authenticity that I've never had in the same way in my work before. And partly because being research-based, often I get to talk about well-being and I get to hide behind the science and the facts.
Yes.
This, though, is a very personal journey, clearly, as we've been talking about today. And so this actually has required me to allow myself to be seen more for me outside of the statistics. And so that's definitely been a little terror, particularly as I think of some of my family members reading it.
Oh, yes, of course. And kudos to you. It's being your whole self and bringing your whole self to your work in a way, like you say, that you haven't done before. And from what I've read of the work that you've been doing and will continue to do, that it is resonating with women in the most profound ways. And so that epiphany, thank you, Mountain, is, has put you on a track that's obviously really joyful in terms of your own personal journey and professional journey, but is having and will continue to have a big impact on so many. I'm already thinking of who I can buy the book and the journal for and gift it. I've already got a few names on my list. So, Michelle, it's just been an absolute joy speaking with you, and I feel excited for what's to come for you as you kind of continue down this newish path. I know you've been on this journey for a couple of years, but to be bringing this to the world now and really helping to kind of open conversations about this. I hope anyone listening that you might think of a few people in your life you might like to share this podcast with. And Michelle, could you please share with listeners where they can learn more?
Yeah, so head over to thegoodgirlgamechangers.com. If you head there, you'll find the survey tool, Jodi, you were talking about earlier. You can do it for free and see how am I on these good girl beliefs. We have lots of podcasts with people like Jules on boundaries, and you'll find the books there and some online workshops and tools that are available as well. And we would love to have you as part of our community. You will be in good company with lots of reforming good girls from all over the world.
Absolutely. I used to call myself a reformed perfectionist, and now I've got a new way to label myself. So it's a journey I'm on too. So thank you again for your time. I'm really grateful.
Thanks, Jodi.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. My gosh, didn't Michelle just hit home with so much of what she shared? And that's such fascinating research. I'm going to share all of the links to Michelle's wonderful work and the socials and the resources that were shared during the episode in the notes for the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me. And if you enjoyed it, please share it. Thanks again. I'll be back again with you next week. Okay, bye. Thank you for sharing this time with me on Well, Hello, Anxiety. Remember, understanding anxiety is the first step to managing it. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Take things one moment at a time. Focus on what you can control and know that you are not alone on this journey. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and I'll meet you right back here next week.